My Cheating Wife's Ultimate Betrayal, a tale of revenge and redemption. Simon Massina was a man of quiet strength, a man who built things with his hands, tables, cabinets, houses, but more importantly, a man who built a life. A good life, one made of oak and stone, sturdy and dependable, just like the man himself. His home was proof of it. The two-story house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, nestled between old maple trees that rustled in the wind. It was the kind of home people admired, the kind of home that spoke of security, of love. The front porch was wide, the swing creaking gently as the summer air whispered through the neighborhood. Inside, it smelled of warm vanilla and fresh-cut wood. Janice, his wife of nearly 10 years, hummed softly in the kitchen as she prepared dinner. Their two children, Jacob and Emma, played in the living room, their laughter bubbling through the house like music. Simon watched them from the doorway, his hands dusted with sawdust from a project in the garage. A small smile played at his lips. This was his world. Perfect. Or at least, that's what he had always believed. But perfection, he would soon learn, was only a thin layer of paint over rotting wood. That night, as they sat around the dinner table, Simon listened to Jacob talk about his day at school. The boy was 7 now, sharp, quick-witted, with an enthusiasm that made Simon proud. "Mrs. Hendricks says I'm the fastest runner in class," Jacob boasted, shoving a forkful of mashed potatoes into his mouth. Simon chuckled. "Fast like your old man, huh?" Janice shot him a teasing glance. "You mean the same old man who pulled a muscle last summer, trying to race a 10-year-old? Laughter filled the room, but something beneath the surface unsettled him. Jacob didn't look like him. Not in the way that Emma did, with her soft features that mirrored Janice's own. Simon had always chalked it up to genetics, recessive traits, maybe some distant relative whose features had resurfaced. His mother-in-law, Penny, had reassured him of that years ago when the thought first crept into his mind. "Some kids just take after someone further down the line," she had said, waving away his concerns. And he had believed her. But now, looking at Jacob, something gnawed at him. The boy's deep-set eyes, his sharp cheekbones, there was no trace of Simon there. It was nothing, he told himself. A silly, meaningless thought. So why did it feel like an itch beneath his skin? That night, as Janice curled up beside him in bed, Simon lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, rattling the window pane. He turned to look at his wife. She was beautiful, still the same woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. Her chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths. Peaceful, untouched by the doubt that gnawed at him. Simon wanted to close his eyes, to let sleep take him. But he couldn't shake the feeling. A feeling that something in his perfect life wasn't quite right. And soon, that feeling would become impossible to ignore. The leak had been bothering Simon for weeks. A slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip from the basement pipe, just subtle enough to be ignored, just persistent enough to be maddening. It wasn't a difficult fix, just another task on the endless list of responsibilities that came with being a husband, a father, a homeowner. But maybe that was why he hadn't done it sooner. Maybe, deep down, Simon had known that once he went down there, once he knelt on the cold concrete floor and reached into the dark corners of the past, he would find something far worse than a leaky pipe. And so, on that quiet Saturday afternoon, while Janice took the kids out for ice cream, Simon finally decided to handle the problem. He set down his toolbox, grabbed a wrench, and slid under the pipe. The chill of the basement clung to his skin as he tightened the corroded fittings, muttering under his breath. The moment he turned the wrench, a sharp creak echoed through the room, followed by a small burst of dust from an overhead shelf. Simon coughed, waving the dust from his face. That's when he noticed it. A box. It was old, wedged into the farthest corner of the basement, half hidden behind a stack of old photo albums and in used Christmas decorations. Unlike the neatly labeled bins around it, this one was unmarked, forgotten. Curiosity tugged at him. He reached for it, fingers brushing against the brittle cardboard. As he pulled it toward him, a fine layer of dust lifted into the air, catching the dim light from the overhead bulb. He didn't know why, but his heart started to beat a little faster. The lid came off easily. Inside, he found papers, bundles of them, old receipts, letters, and faded photographs. At first, it seemed like nothing of significance, just remnants of their life together, packed away and left to be forgotten. But then he saw the envelope. It was tucked beneath a stack of old bills, its edges slightly crumpled, as if someone had opened and closed it many times. There was no stamp, no return address, just a single word on the front, written in familiar cursive. Janice. Simon's stomach tightened. He slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the letter inside. The paper had yellowed slightly, the ink smudged in places. But the words were clear. I miss you, love. Every time I see Jacob, I see myself in him. Simon froze. His eyes locked onto the name at the bottom. Mark Peterson. The room seemed to shrink around him. The walls, the ceiling, even the very air, pressing in, suffocating. His mind struggled to process what he was reading, but his body already knew. His hands had gone numb. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Jacob. Jacob. His son, his firstborn, his flesh and blood. Or at least, that's what he had believed. He read the line again and again. Every time I see Jacob, I see myself in him. No, it wasn't possible. Simon swallowed hard, but his throat felt raw, like he'd swallowed broken glass. His mind raced, sifting through every memory, every moment, looking for something, anything, that would contradict this, that would prove the letter wrong. Jacob's features, his dark eyes, the sharp angle of his jaw, things Simon had always assumed were simply recessive traits, quirks of genetics. Or had he just been lying to himself all these years? A sickening realization crawled through him. He had doubted before, a long time ago, in the earliest days of fatherhood, when Jacob's tiny face had stared up at him with unfamiliar eyes. He had voiced his doubt once, a passing comment, a joke even. And Penny, Janice's mother, had reassured him. Oh, Simon, don't be silly. The Massina men all look like their mothers when they're young. He'll grow into it. So he had believed her, because why wouldn't he? He had been so blind. The letter shook in his hands. The words burned into his brain, searing into his very existence. Simon's vision blurred, his breath turning ragged. His whole world had tilted, as if he were standing at the edge of a vast, black abyss, staring down into something too deep, too dark to comprehend. He forced himself to take a breath, and another. This was just one letter, one man's words. It didn't mean anything. It didn't prove anything. Did it? Simon shoved the letter back into the envelope, his hands trembling. He had to be sure. He had to know. Because if this was true, if Jacob wasn't his, then everything, his marriage, his family, his very identity, was built on a lie. And if that was the case, then Simon Massina was about to become someone he never thought he could be. Simon sat at the kitchen table, gripping the letter so tightly his knuckles turned white. The house was silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the old wooden clock on the wall. The same clock he had handcrafted years ago, back when he believed his life was perfect. Now, everything felt different. The air itself seemed heavier, thick with betrayal. Janice moved around the kitchen, oblivious to the storm brewing in Simon's chest. She hummed softly as she wiped the counter, a small smile playing on her lips. Simon's jaw clenched. That smile, so easy, so natural. Had she smiled like that while she was lying to him all these years? While she was sneaking around with another man? While she carried another man's child inside her? A wave of nausea rolled through him. He set the letter down on the table, smoothing out the creases with a slow, deliberate motion. Janice, he said, his voice quiet but firm. She turned, still holding the dish towel. Yeah. Simon lifted his gaze to meet hers. There was no anger in his eyes, no rage, just something far colder. Who is Mark Peterson? The blood drained from Janice's face so quickly that for a moment, Simon thought she might faint. Her grip on the dish towel tightened. I don't know, she stammered. Simon exhaled sharply, a mirthless chuckle escaping his lips. Don't do that. Do what? Lie to me. Not now. Not after everything. Janice swallowed hard, glancing at the letter on the table. Her fingers twitched like she wanted to grab it, to snatch the evidence away before it burned her alive. Simon leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I found the letters, Janice. His voice was even eerily calm. I read them. Janice's mouth opened, but no words came out. Simon tilted his head slightly. Say something. Tears welled in her eyes. Simon. He slammed his palm down on the table so hard that the salt shaker tipped over, sending tiny white grains spilling across the surface. Don't lie. Janice flinched. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, she took a shaky breath. It was a long time ago. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Simon's lips curled into something that might have been a smile if there was any warmth left in him. A long time ago, he repeated, is that all it was? Janice ran a trembling hand through her hair. It didn't mean anything. Simon let out a slow, bitter breath. Didn't mean anything? He tapped the letter with his finger. This says otherwise. This says you loved him. Janice's lower lip quivered. Simon stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He stepped toward her, closing the distance inch by inch. Tell me the truth, Janice, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Her shoulders shook. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. Simon studied her. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built his life around, was crumbling in front of him. Good. You should have felt pain. You should have felt devastation. But all he felt was a quiet, simmering darkness settling into his bones. He took another step forward. Jacob isn't mine, is he? Janice squeezed her eyes shut. A single tear slid down her cheek. Simon's breath hitched, but he didn't move. She didn't need to say the words. Her silence was the answer. A dull ringing filled his ears. The walls of the kitchen blurred at the edges. The ground beneath him felt unsteady, as if the world itself was tilting off its axis. For 8 years, he had been a father to that boy. He had taught him how to ride a bike, kissed his scraped knees, read him bedtime stories. He had believed, with every fiber of his being, that Jacob was his son. And now he wasn't. Simon swallowed, his throat dry as sandpaper. You stole my life from me, he whispered. Janice sobbed. Please, Simon, I love you. I love. He laughed, but it was hollow, lifeless. You don't know the first thing about love. He stepped back, his movements slow and deliberate. A storm raged behind his eyes, but his face remained unreadable. Janice reached for him, but he pulled away before her fingers could touch him. Don't, he said. His voice was quiet, deadly. Janice's breath hitched. The man standing before her was no longer the husband she had known. Something inside Simon had shifted, cracked. And in that moment, as he turned away, Janice had no idea that she had not just lost his love. She had awakened something far, far worse. Something that would not rest until everything she had was taken from her, piece by agonizing piece. And this was only the beginning. A thick silence settled between them, suffocating and heavy. The air smelled of stale coffee and the lavender candle Janice had lit earlier that evening, an odd contrast to the poison that now dripped from her lips. There's more. The words barely left her mouth before Simon felt a fresh wave of dread crawl up his spine. His grip tightened on the letter in his hand, its paper crumpling under the force of his fingers. He had already been gutted once tonight. What else could she possibly say that would deepen the wound? Janice's eyes flickered downward, her fingers twisting in her lap. Guilt radiated from her like a sickness. Simon inhaled sharply. Say it. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Say it. His voice was sharp now, cutting through the room like a blade. Her shoulders shook as she whispered, Emma isn't yours either. Simon stilled. For a moment, reality seemed to distort, his vision narrowing to a pinpoint, as if the entire world had collapsed into that one sentence. He swayed slightly, his knees threatening to give. No, his own voice sounded foreign to him. Janice finally met his gaze, her face contorted in anguish. I'm sorry, she whispered. No, he repeated, stepping back. His mind scrambled for an explanation, something, anything, that would turn this nightmare into a misunderstanding. Emma looks like me. Janice shook her head, her lips trembling. Coincidence. Simon's stomach clenched. His mind reeled, racing through memories, searching for cracks he had never noticed before. Emma's laughter, the way she clung to him, the nights he had stayed up rocking her to sleep when she had fevers. Was it all just an illusion? Boo! The words scraped against his throat. Janice let out a shuddering breath. A different man. The room seemed to tilt. Not Mark Peterson. A different man. This wasn't just one affair. This was a pattern. A cycle. His wife, his devoted, loving wife, had been living a double life right under his nose. Simon pressed a hand to his forehead, willing the nausea away. How long? Janice swallowed hard. Emma's father, it was a one-time thing. Before we even had Jacob, I never wanted to hurt you, Simon. He laughed, a dry, hollow sound that didn't belong to him. A one-time thing, he echoed. So you betrayed me twice. Lied to me for years. Let me raise 2 children thinking they were mine, while all this time his voice broke. Tears streamed down Janice's face. I love you. I swear I never wanted it to happen like this. Simon's chest ached. Love. She dared to use that word now. He turned away, gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white. His body trembled, not just from rage, but from something deeper. Loss. Because that's what this was. A death. Not a physical one, but something just as permanent. His marriage. His trust. His very sense of self. Dead. Janice took a step toward him. Simon, please, we can. Don't, he growled, turning on her so fast that she flinched. His hands curled into fists at his sides. The urge to break something, to hurt something, pulsed through his veins like fire. He had never been a violent man, but at that moment, he understood how easy it would be to become one. Janice must have seen it in his eyes because she took a cautious step back. Simon exhaled slowly. You stole my life from me. Simon, I gave you everything. My love, my loyalty, my name, and you spat on it. She sobbed. It was never meant to be like this. But it is. His voice was eerily calm now, and that seemed to frighten her more than his shouting had. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Janice's quiet crying. Simon stared at her, the woman he had adored, the woman he had built a future with, the woman who had destroyed him. And yet, in the darkest corner of his mind, something cold and sharp whispered, You're not done yet. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Simon stood in the darkened living room, staring at the framed family photos on the wall. Smiling faces, laughter frozen in time. A perfect lie. His hands clenched into fists. His breathing was slow, controlled, but inside, a storm was raging. Every moment with Janice, every kiss, every whispered, I love you, all of it had been a deception. And worst of all, she had stolen the one thing he could never get back, time. 10 years. A decade spent loving a woman who had betrayed him in the cruelest way. And now, she expected him to move on? To accept it? To forgive? No. Simon Massina was not a man who forgave. He turned away from the photos, his mind already working, calculating. Revenge was not an impulse. It was an art. If he lashed out now, If he let anger control him, he would lose. And Janice? She would walk away, free to start over. That wasn't an option. She had to feel it, really feel it. The way he had felt it when he read those letters. The way his stomach had twisted, his throat had closed, his world had collapsed. She had stolen his life. Now, he would steal hers. Simon took a deep breath and forced his face to soften, forced the tension from his shoulders. He walked up the stairs, careful to keep his footsteps steady. Janice was sitting on the bed, her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes swollen from crying. She looked up as he entered, searching his face for signs of anger. Instead, he gave her what she least expected. "I need time," he said. His voice was calm, almost tired. "I don't know how to process this yet." Janice's lips parted as if she had braced for shouting, accusations, anything but this. "I understand," she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you, Simon." A bitter laugh threatened to escape, but he swallowed it. Instead, he nodded, stepping closer, reaching out just enough to make her believe. "I need space," he said, "but I won't make any rash decisions. Not yet." Her shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank you." She had no idea. That night, as Janice slept beside him, Simon stared at the ceiling. His mind raced through every possibility, every scenario. Divorce? No. Too easy. Exposing her? Maybe, but there had to be more. He needed to dismantle her life from the inside out. He slipped out of bed, moving quietly as he made his way to his office. He sat at his desk, turned on his laptop, and opened a blank document. One word: revenge. Then, beneath it, he started listing her vulnerabilities. Money. Their finances were still intertwined. She depended on him. He could change that. Career. Her job. She had recently been promoted. What if something jeopardized that? Reputation. What would her friends, her colleagues, think if they knew who she really was? Mark Peterson, the man she betrayed him with. Was his life still intact? That wasn't fair. Simon smiled coldly. No, that wasn't fair at all. The next day, he made his first move. He went to their shared bank account and slowly started withdrawing money, small amounts at first. Nothing noticeable, just a drip, drip, drip of disappearing funds. He transferred it into a separate account under a different name, one Janice wouldn't trace. By the time she noticed, it would be too late. Then, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Ethan Cole," a gruff voice answered. "Ethan, it's Simon." A pause, then a low chuckle. Well, haven't heard from you in ages. What's this about?" "I need your services," Simon said, leaning back in his chair. "I need you to find someone for me. And I need everything." There was a silence on the line, then a slow, knowing exhale. "This sounds interesting." "It is," Simon said. "I want every piece of dirt you can dig up on a man named Mark Peterson. And I want it fast." A small smirk tugged at Simon's lips as he ended the call. The game had begun. And Janice? She didn't even know she was playing. Simon Massina sat in the dim glow of his workshop, the scent of sawdust thick in the air. His hands, once steady and skilled with carving wood, trembled slightly as he turned the pages of a thin file. The papers inside weren't blueprints for a new cabinet or sketches for a dining table. No, these were something far more important. These pages held the blueprint for destruction. Across the table sat Ethan Cole, a private investigator Simon had hired the day after his wife's confession. He was a wiry man in his 50s, with tired eyes that had seen the worst of people. Ethan had built a career out of uncovering secrets, and tonight, he had delivered something truly vile. Simon inhaled deeply and began to read. Mark Peterson. Age, 44. Occupation, wealthy real estate developer. Married, 2 children, a picture-perfect family. It made Simon sick. There, stapled to the documents, was a grainy photograph. A man with sharp cheekbones and graying hair, dressed in a tailored suit, laughing beside a beautiful woman in a designer dress. his wife, his real family. Simon clenched his jaw so tightly it ached. Ethan cleared his throat. He moved to Greenfield about 7 years ago. That's when he cut ties with Janice. Didn't look back. Built a new life. From what I can tell, his wife never knew a thing. Simon scoffed. Of course she didn't. Mark Peterson had walked away from the mess he created, leaving Simon to raise a son that wasn't his, leaving him to waste a decade in a marriage built on lies. But Mark's happy little life was about to crumble. Simon flipped to the next page. It was a bank statement. Mark's real estate firm had been struggling. Several bad investments. A few desperate loans. The cracks were already forming. Perfect. Simon looked up at Ethan, his expression unreadable. Does he have any skeletons in his closet? Ethan hesitated. Aside from the affair with Janice? Not much. But Simon raised an eyebrow. Ethan slid another paper across the table. This is where it gets interesting. Simon scanned the document. It was a police report. Nothing major, just a minor incident from years ago. But it was enough. A discreet settlement with an ex-employee, a woman. Simon didn't need to read between the lines. He'd seen enough powerful men use money to make their problems disappear. Mark had secrets, and Simon would make sure the world knew them. Ethan's voice was calm, almost hesitant. Simon closed the file and exhaled slowly. I want him to lose everything, just like he did to me. Ethan nodded. He had seen men like Simon before, men who had been pushed too far, and he knew better than to argue. Then let's get started, Ethan said. Simon leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping against the wood grain. The plan was forming, sharp and clear. Mark had built a life on lies. Now, Simon would set fire to it. And he would watch as everything burned. Simon Massina had always been a patient man. Years of working with his hands, measuring, cutting, shaping wood into something strong and lasting, had taught him that true craftsmanship took time, precision. And so, when it came to destroying Janice, he worked with the same deliberate care. There would be no outbursts, no reckless moves. Just a slow, methodical unraveling. The first step was control. Simon had learned, through trial and error, that people never saw the danger coming when it was wrapped in kindness. So he softened his voice, slowed his breathing, and let his anger settle beneath a mask of reluctant forgiveness. We can work through this, he told Janice one evening, his voice even, for the kids. She had stared at him, searching his face, looking for something, doubt, rage, hesitation. But he gave her nothing. Instead, he let his words sink in, let her believe she still had a chance. He let her exhale in relief, the tension in her shoulders easing. Good. Let her feel safe. It would make the fall so much sweeter. Janice worked as an event planner for a high-end company, the kind of job that thrived on reputation. Simon knew this, and he used it against her. First, the whispers. Anonymously, he sent an email to her boss, subtly questioning her work ethic. I wanted to bring something to your attention. I've noticed discrepancies in Janice's recent projects, misallocated funds, scheduling issues. I respect your company's reputation, so I thought you should know. No accusations, no direct attack, just enough to plant a seed of doubt. And doubt, he knew, grew like a weed. Days later, Janice came home, her expression tight. Something weird is going on at work, she murmured. People are acting off. Simon frowned in feigned concern. What do you mean? She hesitated. I don't know. It's just a feeling. He nodded, keeping his expression neutral. I'm sure it's nothing. And just like that, he made her doubt herself. While Janice fought shadows at work, Simon struck the next blow, her finances. They had a joint savings account. Legally, it belonged to both of them. Slowly, quietly, he began withdrawing funds, moving them into an account she didn't know about. Not all at once. That would be too obvious. Just a little at a time. By the time she noticed, it was too late. Simon, she said one evening, her voice tight, Did you take money from our savings? He blinked, feigning confusion. What? No. What? There's money missing. Thousands of dollars. He frowned. Maybe you made a withdrawal and forgot. Her face darkened. I'm not stupid. He held up his hands. I'm just saying, mistakes happen. Have you checked with the bank? She glared at him, frustration and paranoia blooming in her eyes. Good. Let her feel the ground shift beneath her feet. Janice started losing sleep. She tossed and turned at night, staring at the ceiling, whispering to herself under her breath. Simon watched her from the darkness, a silent predator studying his prey. She was unraveling. At work, her boss began questioning her integrity. At home, she felt her financial security slipping away. And then, just when she thought things couldn't get worse, Simon delivered the final, cutting blow. An envelope, plain, unmarked, left on the kitchen counter for her to find. Inside were copies of the letters. The ones from Mark Peterson. Janice's past bleeding out in black ink. Her breath hitched as she read them, her hands trembling. Simon watched from the doorway. What is that? He asked, feigning ignorance. She looked up at him, her eyes wild. Where did you get this? He stepped closer, tilting his head. Get what? She held up the letters. These. Who sent them? He shrugged. I don't know, Janice. Maybe it's karma. Her mouth opened, but no words came. He could see it then, the realization sinking in. Someone was pulling the strings. Someone was tearing her life apart. But she didn't know who. And that, Simon thought, was the most delicious part of all. She had no idea that the man standing in front of her, the man she had betrayed and lied to for years, was the one orchestrating her downfall. And by the time she figured it out, it would be far too late. Janice Massina had always been a woman who thrived on control. She was meticulous, calculating, always a step ahead, until now. It began as a trickle, little things. A missing credit card, a late bill she swore she had paid, her coworkers whispering in hushed tones when she walked into the office. At first, she brushed it off. Coincidences. A bad week. Then the trickle became a flood. A routine trip to the grocery store ended with her card being declined. Confused, she checked her banking app. The joint account she shared with Simon, emptied. All $35,000 of it. Her pulse spiked. She tried the savings account. Gone. Her hands trembled as she gripped her phone, dialing Simon's number. Voicemail. She drove home in a haze, her mind racing. When she stormed inside, Simon was in the kitchen, calmly drinking a glass of water. She slammed her purse down on the counter. Where's the money, Simon? He took his time, setting the glass down, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Then he smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Janice's stomach dropped. You really thought I'd just let this go? His voice was maddeningly calm. Her breath hitched. I'll move the money, he said, standing up and walking around the kitchen island, forcing her to take a step back. Our money, Janice. The money I work for. The money I earned while you were busy screwing Mark Peterson. Janice clenched her fists. I made a mistake. No, Janice. Simon's voice turned sharp. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is saying the wrong name in bed. You didn't make a mistake. You built a life on a lie. She swallowed, her throat dry. Simon, please. Please what? He tilted his head. Forgive you? Move on? Pretend like I don't wake up every day knowing that the children I raised aren't mine? A lump formed in her throat. You're still their father. Simon let out a hollow laugh. Am I? His eyes burned into hers. You decided that for me, didn't you? You played God with my life. Janice's heart pounded. She had seen Simon angry before. But this was something else. You emptied the accounts, she said, trying to steady her voice. What are you planning to do? Simon leaned in, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered, I'm going to take everything from you. She felt a chill slither down her spine. You. But before she could finish, the doorbell rang. She turned, her pulse still frantic, and walked cautiously to the door. When she opened it, a thick manila envelope lay at her feet. No one was there. A deep sense of dread settled in her stomach as she bent down to pick it up. She stepped back inside, slowly peeling back the flap, pulling out a thick stack of papers. And then her world shattered. Inside the envelope were copies of her emails. The love letters she had exchanged with Mark. Photos, one she didn't even know existed, of them together at a motel, his hands on her, their faces inches apart. And then, at the very bottom, a divorce petition. Janice's fingers shook as she flipped through the documents. Legal jargon blurred before her eyes. And then she saw it. Simon was fighting for full custody. She looked up, her vision swimming. You can't do this. Simon took a step forward, his expression unreadable. You did this, Janice. Her legs felt weak. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. She had spent years carefully constructing her life, ensuring her secrets remained buried, maintaining the illusion of a perfect wife, a loving mother. And now, in a matter of days, Simon was unraveling it all. She sucked in a breath, trying to gather herself. I won't let you take my children. Simon's lips curled. They're not yours to keep. Janice stared at him, a cold sweat forming at the base of her neck. This was no longer the man she had married. This was someone else. Someone she no longer recognized. And for the first time in her life, she was afraid. Mark Peterson had spent his life carefully constructing an image of success. He was a respected businessman, a devoted husband, and a father to 2 children who adored him. He lived in a pristine suburban mansion, drove an imported luxury car, and had a reputation for his keen business instincts. But what no one knew, what no one was supposed to know, was that he was also a liar, a betrayer, a man who had once whispered promises into Janice's ear and left behind nothing but broken vows. Simon had ensured that Mark's past would not stay buried. It started subtly. Mark came home one evening to find his wife, Ellen, sitting in the dimly lit living room, a glass of wine untouched on the table beside her. The air was thick with tension, the kind that presses against the walls and suffocates a room. Ellen, Mark set down his briefcase, sensing something was off. She lifted her gaze, and in her hand, she held a small stack of letters. Faded, worn at the edges, but still damning. Who is Janice? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. I don't know what you're talking about, he said too quickly. Ellen's lips curled into a bitter smile. Try again. She held up the letter, her fingers tightening around the paper as she read aloud. Every time I see Jacob, I see myself in him. Mark felt as though the walls were closing in. His mind raced, grasping for excuses, explanations, anything. It was a mistake, he stammered. It was years ago, it meant nothing. Ellen let out a short, humorless laugh. Nothing? You fathered a child with another woman. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? To our family. Mark moved toward her, reaching out. Ellen, please, I love you. This doesn't change anything. She recoiled. Doesn't change anything? Her voice rose, raw with betrayal. You lied to me for years. And if I hadn't found these, you never would have told me, would you? Silence. Ellen exhaled sharply, shaking her head as if she were trying to rid herself of the very sight of him. I want you out, she said. Now. Mark's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Out, she repeated, this time with the force of a final decision. And just like that, the life he had so carefully built began to crumble. The next few weeks were a downward spiral. Mark's colleagues at the firm began whispering behind his back. Someone had sent an anonymous tip to the board of directors, exposing his infidelity and the subsequent scandal. Clients pulled away. Business deals evaporated. The final blow came when Ellen filed for divorce. She took the house, the cars, and, worst of all, their children. Mark sat alone in a dimly lit apartment, a far cry from the sprawling home he once owned. Bills piled up on the counter. His phone remained silent, except for the occasional cold message from his lawyer. He tried to reach Janice, desperate for some kind of solace, but she wanted nothing to do with him. She had her own problems. And Mark Peterson, the man who had once had everything, now had nothing. Simon watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. He hadn't needed to lay a hand on Mark to destroy him. All it had taken was the truth, released at just the right moment, like a carefully placed match against a trail of gasoline. And as he stood outside Mark's now empty office, looking at the nameplate that had been removed from the door, Simon allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. One betrayer down. One more to go. And he was just getting started. Simon sat in his lawyer's office, his fingers steepled under his chin. The room smelled of polished wood and expensive cologne, the kind of place where battles weren't fought with fists, but with signatures and subpoenas. Across from him sat Gerald Whitman, a seasoned divorce attorney with salt and pepper hair and the calculating gaze of a man who had won more wars than he had lost. He adjusted his glasses and tapped the stack of papers on his desk. "You're sure about this?" Gerald asked, his voice measured. "Absolutely," Simon said, his tone like steel. "I raised those kids. They're mine." Gerald studied him, considering. The law is complicated in cases like these. Jacob and Emma aren't biologically yours. That's going to be Janice's main argument. Simon's jaw tightened. "I don't care about DNA. I'm the only father they've ever known." Gerald leaned back, his fingers laced together. "Then we need to make this about something else. We don't fight biology, we fight stability. Janice's life has been turbulent lately." Simon smirked. Turbulent is an understatement. The groundwork had already been laid. Janice had been under financial strain ever since Simon discreetly drained their shared savings. She had been reprimanded at work due to anonymous reports of negligence. Her reputation was crumbling brick by brick. But it wasn't enough. Simon needed to deliver the final blow. 2 weeks later, Simon and Janice faced each other in family court. Janice looked different, thinner, more haggard. Her once perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. She still had the poise of a woman who thought she could win, but Simon could see the cracks. Her lawyer, a younger man with an overeager smirk, stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, my client, Janice Massina, is the biological mother of Jacob and Emma. It is her right to maintain custody. Mr. Massina, while once a parental figure, is not their biological father, and—" Simon's lawyer stood before the sentence could be finished. "Objection, Your Honor." The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, nodded. "On what grounds, Mr. Whitman?" Gerald stepped forward smoothly. "My client has been the sole financial provider for these children since birth. He has cared for them, raised them, and has never once abandoned his duties as a father. Biology is irrelevant when it comes to the well-being of the children. We have extensive evidence that Mrs. Massina has engaged in actions that put that stability at risk." Janice's lawyer scoffed. "That's an exaggeration. What actions exactly?" Simon's pulse remained steady as Gerald reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "Your Honor, we have bank statements showing that Mrs. Massina has recently withdrawn large sums of money, leaving her accounts nearly empty." Janice stiffened. She hadn't realized he had been tracking her financial downfall. Gerald continued. "Additionally, we have character statement from former colleagues detailing erratic behavior, missed deadlines, and warnings about her performance." Simon didn't look at her. He could feel her anger radiating across the courtroom, but he remained focused on the judge's reaction. The judge glanced at Janice. "Mrs. Massina, do you have an explanation for these claims?" Janice's voice wavered. I lost some money, yes, but I have a stable job, and my children are my priority." "Your Honor," Gerald interrupted smoothly, "we also have text message evidence showing Mrs. Massina recently attempted to contact Mark Peterson. the man with whom she had an extramarital affair and who fathered both children. She attempted to seek financial support from him after his own marriage ended in divorce. A hush fell over the courtroom. Janice's lawyer visibly tensed. He had not been prepared for this. Janice's face drained of color. That's taken out of context. Simon's lawyer leaned in. Mrs. Massina, are you saying you did not reach out to Mark Peterson for financial assistance after Mr. Massina filed for divorce? Her mouth opened, then closed. The damage was done. After hours of deliberation, the judge called them back into the courtroom. Simon sat with his hands folded, staring straight ahead. Janice fidgeted, biting her lip. The judge cleared her throat. In reviewing all evidence presented, this court finds that while Mr. Massina is not the biological father, he has been the sole parental figure in these children's lives. Stability is of utmost importance, and the court has concerns regarding Mrs. Messina's recent actions and financial instability. As such, primary custody will be granted to Mr. Massina, with visitation rights awarded to Mrs. Massina. The gavel came down. Simon let out a slow breath. It was over. Janice let out a choked sob. She turned to him, eyes red with fury. You took everything from me. Simon met her gaze with cold finality. No, I just took back what was mine. She shook her head in disbelief, but there was nothing left to say. She had lost, and Simon had won. Janice stood on Simon's doorstep, her face pale and hollow. The confident, beautiful woman he had once loved was gone, replaced by a desperate shell of herself. Her once pristine hair hung in tangled waves, her eyes rimmed with red. She had lost weight, too much weight, and her clothes, once symbols of wealth and status, now hung loosely on her fragile frame. Simon leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He had been expecting this moment. Simon, Janice breathed, her voice weak. Can we talk? He didn't answer. He simply stepped aside, allowing her inside. The house was different now, colder, without Janice's touch, without the forced warmth of their so-called family. It had become a hollow structure, just walls and furniture. And yet, it was home in a way it never had been before. Janice stepped in cautiously, as if afraid of what she might find. Her hands trembled as she clutched the sleeves of her worn-out sweater. You've taken everything from me, she whispered. Simon let the words settle, let her feel the weight of them. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. Instead, he smiled. Did I? He asked, his voice like the sharp edge of a blade. Janice's eyes darted to the family portraits on the wall, but something was different. She wasn't in them anymore. Simon had replaced the photos. The ones with her had been removed, erased, as if she had never existed in this house, in this family. Janice let out a shaky breath. I was wrong, she admitted. I was selfish. But Simon, you have to know, I never wanted to hurt you. He laughed then, a cold, humorless laugh. You didn't want to hurt me? He repeated, stepping closer. Janice, you built our entire life on a lie. You let me believe I was a father to children who weren't mine. Every moment, every I love you, every promise, it was all fake. Tears slid down her cheeks. I loved you. Did you? His voice was calm, eerily so. Or did you just love the life I gave you? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Simon took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them. She flinched. You know, he said, voice lower now, almost gentle, there was a time when I would have given anything for us to fix this. When I would have forgiven you, because I loved you that much. He tilted his head, studying her. But that man? The one who would have fought for this marriage. He's gone now, and you killed him. Janice let out a strangled sob. You win, she whispered, shoulders shaking. I have nothing left. Simon exhaled, a slow, measured breath. He should have felt triumphant. This was what he had wanted, to see her broken, to watch her crumble beneath the weight of her own sins. And yet, looking at her now, standing there in ruins, he felt nothing. No satisfaction. No closure. Just emptiness. Janice turned toward the door, defeated. But before she left, she looked back at him one last time. "I did love you," she said softly, "even if you don't believe it." And then she was gone. Simon stood there in silence, staring at the empty doorway. A cold wind blew through the open door. He didn't close it. Not yet. Instead, he listened to the sound of her footsteps fading into the distance. And when he was certain she was truly gone, he whispered the words he had been waiting to say. "Goodbye, Janice." Then he shut the door. And this time he locked it. The call came late at night. Simon had been sitting at the kitchen table, his fingers idly tracing the rim of a whiskey glass, lost in thought. The house was silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The children were asleep upstairs, unaware of the war their father had fought in the shadows. Then the phone rang. A deep sense of unease crawled up Simon's spine as he reached for it. He wasn't expecting a call, especially not at this hour. He answered. "Mr. Massina," a voice asked. "Yes," Simon replied, gripping the glass tighter. "This is Detective Harris with the Newton Police Department. We need to ask you a few questions regarding Mark Peterson." Simon's grip tightened even more. The name alone sent a slow, burning heat through his veins. "What about him?" There was a pause. Then, the detective exhaled heavily. "He's dead, Mr. Massina. Suicide. We found him in his apartment earlier this evening." For a moment, there was nothing. Silence. Stillness. Simon barely blinked, barely breathed. Dead? Mark Peterson was dead. A strange sensation swept over him, a cold, numbing wave that he couldn't quite name. He should have felt something, relief, satisfaction, maybe even triumph. But instead, all he felt was emptiness. "Mr. Massina," the detective pressed. Simon forced himself to speak. "How did it happen?" "Hanged himself," Harris said bluntly. "In his living room. No sign of struggle. Just an empty bottle of scotch and a note left on a coffee table." Simon closed his eyes briefly. He could picture it too easily. The desperation, the loneliness, the final act of a man who had lost everything. Did the note say anything? Another pause. Then the detective spoke, his voice edged with something unreadable. "It had a name on it," he said. "Yours." Simon's pulse slowed. "What?" "He wrote your name. Just that, Simon Massina. Nothing else. No explanation. No apology. Just your name." Simon leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. Why? Why him? Was it blame? A last, bitter attempt to pass his own failures on to someone else? Or was it something else entirely? Something darker, something nameless that clawed at Simon's conscience? He had orchestrated Mark's downfall, had methodically taken everything from him. His wife, his money, his status. He had left the man with nothing. Had he pushed too far? "Did you know him personally?" the detective asked. Simon hesitated. "No. Yes. Not in the way people meant when they spoke of knowing someone. But he had known Mark Peterson in the way a predator knows its prey. He had studied him, hunted him, dismantled him. But none of that could be spoken aloud. "I knew of him," Simon finally said, "but not personally." The detective made a noise, something between skepticism and disinterest. "If you remember anything that might help, let us know." Simon muttered an acknowledgement and hung up. For several minutes, he sat in the dim kitchen, staring at the glass of whiskey in front of him. His own reflection wavered in the amber liquid, distorted and unfamiliar. Mark was gone. His revenge was complete. So why did it feel like something had gone terribly wrong? He reached for the whiskey, took a slow sip, and let the burn settle deep in his chest. Outside, the wind howled against the house, whispering secrets in the dark. And for the first time since it all began, Simon wondered if he had truly won, or if he had lost something far greater. The house was empty now, silent. The echoes of the past still clung to its walls like shadows that refused to fade. Simon stood in the living room, staring at the vacant space where the family portraits once hung. The nail holes gaped at him like open wounds. The divorce was finalized. The custody battle had been fought and won. Janice had lost everything: her reputation, her children, and her carefully woven illusion of control. Mark Peterson was dead. The man who had once stolen Simon's life had paid the ultimate price for his sins. And yet, victory tasted like nothing. Simon walked through the house one last time. His footsteps sounded too loud, too hollow. The rooms that had once been filled with laughter now held only dust and memories. He ran his fingers over the wooden banister of the staircase, the same one he had built with his own hands. He had sanded each step, carved each detail, imagining a home that would last forever. How foolish he had been. Forever didn't exist. Not in love, not in family, not in trust. He passed Jacob's old bedroom, pausing at the doorway. The walls were bare now, stripped of posters and drawings. His son, no, not his son, but still his in every way that mattered, had taken everything when they moved into the new apartment. Simon had fought for those kids with the same relentless determination that had fueled his revenge. And in the end, the courts had ruled in his favor. Janice had tried to argue that he wasn't their biological father, that he had no right. But the judge had seen through her. "You may not share their blood, Mr. Massina," the judge had said, looking over the years of proof: pictures, report cards, school trips, medical bills, bedtime stories. "But you are in every way that counts their father." Simon had clenched his fists as Janice broke down in the courtroom. She had tried to hold on to the children, tried to salvage at least one piece of the life she had so carelessly destroyed. But in the end, she had nothing. No husband, no lover, no home, and no children. Simon stepped into the bedroom, inhaling the faint scent of childhood. The ghosts of bedtime stories and whispered goodnights lingered here. He swallowed the lump in his throat. This had never been about the kids. Not really. They were innocent. None of this had ever been their fault. It had been about Janice, about making her suffer the way he had suffered. And now it was over. Simon turned away from the room, heading downstairs. The movers had already taken the last of the furniture. All that remained was the heavy oak dining table, the one where they had shared their first meal as a family. He had built it himself, every inch of it crafted with care. He ran a hand across its surface, feeling the imperfections in the wood. Scratches, dents, marks of a life lived. This table had witnessed birthdays, Christmas dinners, late-night conversations, and quiet moments of love he had once believed were real. Now was nothing but wood, just like the marriage had been nothing but lies. He exhaled, long and slow, then walked out the front door, locking it behind him for the last time. The key felt heavy in his palm. He could toss it, but what was the point? The house was no longer his problem. Outside, the moving truck idled by the curb. Jacob and Emma waited in the back seat of Simon's car, watching him. He climbed into the driver's seat, adjusting the rearview mirror. His children looked at him with trust, with love that Janice had never truly deserved. Jacob met his eyes. "Are we really never coming back?" Simon hesitated, then shook his head. "No, buddy, we're not." Jacob nodded, seeming to understand. Emma leaned against her brother, sleepy from the early morning drive. Simon shifted the car into gear, pulling away from the house one final time. The past shrank in the rearview mirror, fading into something distant. He had won. He had taken everything from Janice, just as she had taken everything from him. But as he drove down the empty street, a strange hollowness settled in his chest. He had burned the past to the ground, but what had he really built in its place? The road ahead was open, endless, a fresh start. But the man he had once been? That man was gone. And in his place was something colder, something darker. Simon kept his hands on the wheel, his grip firm. There was no going back now. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the far wall. It was an old thing, its brass frame dulled with time, but it still kept steady time, an unwavering reminder of the minutes, the hours, the years that had passed. Simon sat in the dim glow of the living room lamp, staring at the reflection in his whiskey glass. Amber liquid swirled as he tilted it slightly, the ice clinking like distant echoes of a life he had long since abandoned. The man who stared back at him from the glass was unfamiliar. There were new lines on his face, etched deep like battle scars. His once soft eyes had hardened, sharpened. He had always been a good man, steady, loving, dependable. But good men didn't survive betrayal. Good men were devoured. And so, Simon had become something else. Outside, the wind howled against the window panes, rattling them in their frames. March had arrived with bitter winds, but Simon barely noticed. His thoughts were elsewhere, drifting through the wreckage he had left behind. Mark Peterson was dead, a bullet to the temple, a final escape from the consequences of his sins. Simon had read the obituary in the newspaper, staring at the grainy, black and white photo of the man who had stolen his life. A wifeless, childless corpse, buried in a cheap casket, mourned by few. Janice was ruined. After losing custody of the children, she had tried to pick up the pieces, but there was nothing left. Her job was gone, her reputation tarnished, her friends absent. She had reached out once, just once, pleading for a chance to see the kids, to make things right. Simon hadn't answered. He had thought revenge would taste sweet, that bringing them to their knees would fill the void their betrayal had left inside him. But now, sitting alone in the half-darkness, he wasn't sure what he had won. The children were upstairs, fast asleep. Jacob and Emma, the only two innocent souls in this entire disaster. They didn't know the full truth yet. One day they would. One day they would ask why their mother wasn't in their lives, why their real father had vanished from existence. What would he tell them? That love was a lie? That trust was a weapon people used against you? That sometimes justice wasn't found in courtrooms or prayers, but in the quiet, calculated destruction of those who wronged you? Simon ran a hand down his face, sighing. He had thought this moment, this quiet, victorious moment, would bring peace. Instead, it brought silence. Not the comforting kind, not the peaceful kind, the kind that stretched on endlessly. A part of him had died in the process. The man who had once believed in family, in love, in the sacred bonds of trust, he was gone. And in his place sat a man who understood a much darker truth. Everyone had secrets, and some were worth destroying for. The whiskey burned his throat as he took another sip, his gaze settling on the darkened window. His reflection stared back at him, eyes hollow yet knowing. Outside, the wind howled again, but Simon didn't flinch. He had faced the storm, and he had won. But winning had never felt so empty.